But welcome everyone to this Press Club event today. It's a documentary produced by Tim White about the Burisma gas scandal in the Ukraine. I'm Julian Hale. I'm going to moderate. So at the end, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions. We've already received one or two questions. So we'll start with those probably. And I'll just hand over straight away to Tim White so he can present this before we go into the documentary. So over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone attending today. And I should say bonjour, hello, and dobry dien as well for anyone a little bit further towards the east of Europe joining us, wherever you are. Thank you very much for paying attention and joining me for this premiere. I need to thank everyone at Brussels Press Club, not least, as you've just heard from our moderator, Julian. So if you do have any questions, you can flag them in chat maybe or email them in to the Press Club, I believe, to our technician who's worked wonders to get everything together today, Leo, and to Laurent as well, who's been managing the event. And Press Club Brussels, always very hospitable to us. A real shame that because of the situation, I couldn't be there in person, but hopefully next time. So, yeah, thank you for watching and paying interest in this event. It was really born out of me getting a little bored in lockdown, having very little work, getting involved in numerous discussions and reading a lot of incorrect information, I thought at the time, about Burisma, as the title of the film suggests. And I just wanted to simplify things if I could for people who might not really understood and got turned off during the talk originally and in the election in the US in the campaign as well. It reared its somewhat ugly head, shall we say, again. And so I just thought, let's take a fresh look at this. Let's re-examine everything that's out there in the public domain, and let's try to find some answers and present it in a more simplistic manner. So questions at the end, but without further ado, let's take a look at our documentary that we've put together for you, A Lot of Hot Air. What is the truth in the Burisma gas scandal?
Hunter Biden's recently published tell-all autobiography has put back into focus a major story from recent years. I'm in the suburbs of Kiev. Behind me, the offices of Burisma Holdings, officially registered in Cyprus. But this Ukrainian company has been made famous worldwide, not just for its gas contracts. Remarkably, the story began more than 7 years ago when Ukraine was celebrating victory as protesters on the street saw corrupt President Yanukovych flee the country, allowing the revolution of dignity to be completed. A new president won free and fair elections. Also in 2014, the son of then Vice President Joe Biden became a board member at little-known energy firm Burisma. Even then, this raised eyebrows in US media, such as this report in the Washington Post. It was known back then that Burisma was actually controlled by Nikolai Zlochevsky, as the Post states, a former government minister and a member of the disgraced ex-president's Party of Regions, which is largely seen as pro-Russian. More flags were raised by other new names appearing on the board of the Ukrainian gas company with potential ties to the American political elite. But analysts agree there's nothing illegal or suspicious in merely joining the board of any company.
I can agree with those people who argue that like he joined the Burisma just actually because of his last name was Biden. I would say it was kind of both actually beneficial for him and for the gas company, because probably he gained experience in that area, and the gas company actually got some guy with Biden's last name.
This would likely have been where the story had ended, were it not for an extraordinary sequence of events that kept the subject in the headlines many years later. First, Barack Obama's term ended and Donald Trump entered the White House. When it became clear Joe Biden would stand for presidency himself, Team Trump tried to dish the dirt. What they found was that in the last months of Obama's time in office, Ukraine had fired Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin, who had been investigating Burisma and Hunter Biden's role.
Есть запись разговора непосредственно Порошенко и Шокина, где Порошенко докладывает Байдену на тему того, как он снимал Шокина. И Байден очень внимательно слушает этот текст. В конце говорит очень хорошо. Так вот, в тексте Порошенко идут слова, что несмотря на то, что никаких претензий по коррупции или по работе к Шокину нет, я выполнил ваше указание, мой суверен, и решил вопрос по генпрокурору. Забрал у него заявление. Если вы знаете, то Шокин 30 или там 45 дней назад подал в Европейскую комиссию обращение о наложении санкций на Порошенко и Байдена. Есть такая процедура, я думаю, что она будет происходить впервые, но она достаточно интересна в юридическом плане. У нас есть пленка, мы можем ее послушать. Там, где Байден с Порошенко обсуждают этот кейс.
There is a new government and a new prosecutor general. I am prepared to do a public signing of the commitment for the $1 billion.
And despite of the fact that we don't have any corruption charges, we don't have any information about he doing something wrong, I especially asked him, no, it was the day before yesterday, I especially asked him to resign.
Congratulations on installing the new prosecutor general. It's going to be critical for him to work quickly to repair the damage Shokin did. And I'm a man of my word. And that now that the new prosecutor general is in place, we're ready to move forward in signing that new $1 billion loan guarantee.
That's Andrei Derkach, a Ukrainian lawmaker who released this secret recording last year, although Biden's office say the recording is fabricated. Derkach, though, has compiled a mountain of what he insists is evidence of corruption in both Ukraine and the United States, which he was keen to share when we eventually got to meet. But investigations by a cross-party US Senate Intelligence Committee found no evidence of wrongdoing. Most journalists and Ukraine experts were equally unimpressed.
I didn't take a lot of it too seriously because of the framing of it as being, evidence that Soros was in fact governing Ukraine via the Bidens. What I will say is undoubtedly there is corruption in Ukraine. It's entirely possible that aid to you, that much is true. It's very unlikely that this has anything to do with George Soros. It's very unlikely that George Soros is governing Ukraine or has governed Ukraine directly or indirectly. And the involvement of the Bidens in any such corruption is very problematic and unlikely. Derkach, as I say, is a graduate of the FSB College in Moscow from the 90s, I believe, and has links to Russian intelligence services. Now he's been identified as a Russian agent by American counterintelligence.
Now, the US Treasury Department says you're an active Russian agent. So I'm just asking you plain and simply, are you a Russian agent?
Мне было стыдно читать отчет уважаемых представителей спецслужб Соединенных Штатов, который состоял из надерганных из разных источников соросят, средств массовой информации, плюс каких-то лоббистов, плюс мнений посольства из стиля Хали Лайкли. Посольство, где они написали Хали Лайкли, то есть из стиля Хали Лайкли. Потому что вообще в мире очень с уважением относятся к спецслужбам Соединенных Штатов, во многом заслуженно. Так вот, я думаю, что если бы Билл Донован, Эд Гувер и Ален Даллес почитали бы этот отчет, они плакали бы от стыда. Потому что ни одного доказательства, ни одной внятной истории на эту тему нет. А самое главное, вопрос в чем? Когда ты борешься с коррупцией, ты знаешь, что будет противодействие, что будет ответка. Единственный момент, что в американской составляющей во многом санкции – это внесудебный механизм репрессий, основанный на лоббистских кампаниях. Это мы для себя четко видим.
This is where the president of Ukraine lives. In 2014, Petro Poroshenko moved here, following on from his election victory, in wake of the Maidan protests. The war in southeast Ukraine left Poroshenko desperate for cash, allowing then Vice President Joe Biden the opportunity to offer advice or to make demands, depending on your viewpoint. That was before the United States released $1 billion in funding set for Ukraine.
To say that Ukraine is managed by United States, it's not true directly. Yes, United States has give a lot of grants for civil society teams to improve democracy, to make clear that society is open. And Ukraine is the one country in post-Soviet area there. The election very transparent, in democratic rules, and to the power, and only opposition leaders get the power after only 5 years.
Taras Semenyuk is a respected journalist and analyst, but there are many who oppose the view. One compelling witness is Konstantin Kulik, who used to work in the prosecutor's office in Kiev. He helped recover billions of dollars for Ukraine from criminal organizations while investigating ex-president Yanukovych's connections. But he too soon found himself sacked.
В 2014 году Соединенные Штаты Америки ввели санкции финансовые в отношении бывшего президента Украины Януковича и его окружения. Все лица с этого списка, они постарались найти лоббистов в Соединенных Штатах для того, чтобы решить вопрос со своими санкциями. В том числе этим занимался Курченко, в том числе этим занимался Злачевский. И в 2019 году, когда мы вышли на конфискацию 6,5 миллиардов долларов США, когда определили обвинения, я предъявил обвинения Курченко, Злачевскому, Ложкину и другим лицам с окружения Порошенко, действующего президента, то я так понимаю, что лоббисты, действуя через посольство США, им удалось добиться моего увольнения путем того, что были проведены конкурсы на соответствие занимаемой посаде, куда вошли люди, которые раньше работали у Злачевского. Ну, понятно, как они бы оценили мое соответствие занимаемой посаде.
Volodymyr Zelensky's landslide victory in the 2019 presidential election was followed by similar success in the parliamentary election soon after, giving him full control of the Ukrainian parliament, the Rada, situated just behind me.
Смотрите, мы начали наше расследование с того, что изучали вопросы, связанные с использованием материально-технической помощи, которую уделяли нам и страны Европейского Союза, и Соединенные Штаты для Украины. Как член бюджетного комитета я был одним из руководителей рабочей группы по изучению этих кейсов. Это было начало 2019 года. И благодаря нашей работе мы собрали громадное количество информации, в том числе, которая подтверждена и выводами счетной комиссии. Так вот, согласно официальному заключению 2017 года, 5,2 миллиарда долларов было использовано технической помощи нерационально, не по назначению и с элементами нарушений. Дальше эту информацию, когда мы начали расследовать и работать с этой информацией, мы получили громадное сопротивление со стороны разных посольств, структур, соросят, как мы говорим.
Sadly for Ukraine, it seems all too common for criminal cases to be opened and then shut down, a thought confirmed by Dmitry Livas, the director of one of Ukraine's leading research centers.
Я гадаю, що це одна із тих справ, яке
в принципі, навряд чи буде завершена з огляду на те, що зацікавлені особи, вони перебувають не тільки в Україні, а ще й за кордоном, і більше того, в таких країнах-лідерах. Тому ця справа, вона певним чином була і політично обумовлена, і з іншого боку, немає і не може бути зацікавленості завершити її саме в такий спосіб, аби призначити або визначити винного.
But is Hunter Biden one of the culprits? Not, according to the editor of the EU Today website.
The allegations against him, to me, they smack of a stitch-up from start to finish. How interesting it is, for example, that the laptop that was put in for repairs, and surprise, surprise, the chap who was doing the repairs found the incriminating email suggesting that Hunter had introduced Joe Biden to his Ukrainian colleagues. What a strange coincidence that hard drive was copied and given by a humble computer repairman to Rudy Giuliani's lawyer. And Rudy Giuliani just happened to be the person who was pushing for the Ukrainian investigation. No, I'm sorry, this has no credibility at all.
In 2019, there was a different president occupying the White House. There was a different president in the House of Commons as well, here in Ukraine. One can imagine Volodymyr Zelensky's face being just as contorted during his call with President Trump, details of which were leaked, plunging Ukraine and Trump back into the headlines again.
The Democrats sensed blood and, as we all know, tried and failed to impeach Donald Trump. But the investigations brought Ukraine back into the spotlight, and a whole load of other allegations surfaced, going back to Burisma and alleged US interference in Ukraine's affairs, predating Trump's presidency. During a Senate intelligence hearing, former Deputy Chief of Mission in Ukraine, George Kent, confirmed he raised concerns years ago about Hunter Biden's senior position with that energy firm, Burisma.
Given Hunter Biden's role in Burisma's board of directors, at some point you testified in your deposition that you expressed some concern to the vice president's office. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what did they do about that concern that you expressed?
I have no idea. I reported my concern to the office of the vice president.
Okay, and that was the end of it? And nobody...
Sir, you would have to ask people who worked in the office of the vice president during 2015.
But after you expressed the concern of a perceived conflict of interest at the least, the vice president's engagement in Ukraine didn't decrease, did it?
Correct, because the vice president was promoting U.S. policy objectives in Ukraine.
And Hunter Biden's role on the board of Burisma didn't cease, did it?
To the best of my knowledge, it didn't. And my concern was that there was the possibility of a perception of a conflict of interest.
Mr. Kent was last year alleged to have been instrumental in the setting up of ANT-AC, a largely US-funded anti-corruption center. Some point to George Soros' foundation also helping to finance the scheme, saying it's US interference. When Viktor Shokin was forced to resign as Prosecutor General, Joe Biden even admitted his part in proceedings.
And I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
You'll notice Joe Biden added at the time. That solid person who was next into the Prosecutor General hot seat was Yuri Lutsenko. We tried to speak with him, but he did not return our calls or messages. But in a previous interview with The Hill, Mr. Lutsenko made remarkable allegations, saying he was stunned when the ambassador gave me a list of people whom we should not prosecute. At the time, Ms. Ambassador thought our interview of the Ukrainian citizens, of the Ukrainian civil servants who were frequent visitors in the US Embassy, could cast a shadow on that anti-corruption policy. Ukraine was apparently investigating the Anti-Corruption Center itself, but the US ambassador to Ukraine at the time, Marie Yovanovitch, who was subsequently sacked by Trump, adamantly denies Lutsenko's claims.
Although then and now, I have always understood that I served at the pleasure of the president, I still find it difficult to comprehend that foreign and private interests were able to undermine US interests in this way. Individuals who apparently felt stymied by our efforts to promote stated US policy against corruption, that is, to do our mission, were able to successfully conduct a campaign of disinformation against a sitting ambassador using unofficial back channels.
Ukrainian and now US politics increasingly seems like a case of he said, she said. Recently, even Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, became the subject of an FBI investigation into his role, into the various allegations as once again Ukraine made headlines worldwide.
Obviously, he was the person tasked with persuading the Ukrainians to open an investigation. And as I understand it, they asked him for evidence. He could not offer any evidence whatsoever. Possibly he could offer something else. This is how these people work. This is how these people work. I have friends, acquaintances who in the law profession in Ukraine, and the stories I hear.
Yeah.
It's a country in which if your child is taking an exam, if you want them to get a good grade, you've got to give a present to the teacher.
Когда ты цепляешь такие сложные темы, естественно, ты наживаешь врагов. Поэтому с Giuliani у нас был вопрос, связанный с технической помощью. Безусловно, его интересовали вопросы, связанные с Burisma и с вопросами коррупции в ТЭК, в топливно-энергетическом комплексе. И исходя из этой работы, мы тоже работали в этом направлении. Но на самом деле пленки, которые появились в феврале месяце, у нас их было порядка 5 часов. Опубликовали мы 45 минут. Не публиковали мы то, что не касалось иллюстрации коррупции и внешнего управления. Мы публиковали то, что составляет внешнее управление и международную коррупцию. Много ли этих пленок, по моим оценкам? По моим оценкам, пленок порядка 200 часов. Они есть в разных местах. Потому что бывший президент Порошенко имел to be in a habit, имел привычку записывать разговоры. И в моем понимании, в каком-то промежутке времени потерял контроль над архивом. Поэтому наши отношения с Giuliani – это исключительно отношения его как юриста и известного борца с коррупцией, который отстаивает интересы своей страны, с народным депутатом, который, исходя из своих полномочий народного депутата, законов и Конституции Украины, выполняет свои обязанности по отношению к своему народу. На каком-то этапе эти интересы совпали. Вот о чем идет речь.
Ukraine is a country which has grown used to scandal and corruption. Transparency International still rates the nation well outside the top 100 in its annual report. Most in Ukraine hope and believe this latest chapter can be closed.
Rumors are saying that this case is still alive, because we know that Ukraine is separated for two big ideological parties. So one is the pro-European, pro-Western course, and the second is the pro-Russian opposition platform for the life. It's called so, and for this party, it's very important to use this case, to use this argument, to say that Ukraine is managed by the huge states, for example, United States.
But some journalists swim against the tide, and despite investigations in the USA failing to find any wrongdoing by the Bidens, Volodymyr Boyko is not convinced.
Я не думаю, що Сенатський комітет реально щось досліджував. Я читав виступи, я читав оцінки, і мене склалося абсолютно переконання, тверде переконання, що під час цього розслідування в Сполучених Штатах просто не уяви не мали, про що йдеться, не досліджували взагалі це питання, не досліджували факти, а дослідити їх можна не шляхом там направлення якихось там листів, а шляхом проведення певних слідчих дій. Для цього було потрібно, щоб в Сполучених Штатах очевидно генеральний прокурор звернувся до свого колеги офіційно в Україні і в порядку міжнародно-правової допомоги спільно утворили групу і провели перевірку фактів.
Ukraine is involved in an endless battle, as you probably understand, against oligarchy. And that oligarchy has kind of contaminated the country's legal system. Legal cases are opened and closed largely due to tranches of money, if you like, or threats delivered by oligarchs to judges and to lawyers. So that really depends on the legal situation in Ukraine. At the moment, there is a very strong push against Zelensky to get him to deal with the oligarchs, and he's having to make some gestures in that direction. It's likely, really, whether or not the legal proceedings continue depends entirely on the political situation in Ukraine and in the US.
Andriy Derkach has compiled boxes of evidence and a host of witnesses. But those opposed to Derkach and his supporters regularly accuse them of being agents or paid by Russia or powerful oligarchs.
Who's paying you now?
Эти расследования никто не финансирует. Я этим занимаюсь, потому что на протяжении 5 лет была проделана глобальная работа, были собраны очень много доказательств, чтобы вы понимали, я даже могу вам передать фотографии. У нас 4 кабинета Генеральной прокуратуры были полностью завалены томами дел, потому что в архиве Генеральной прокуратуры уже не было места, чтобы размещать. Исследователи, прокуроры, они ходили между этими томами. Под контролем мне группе прокуроров удалось наложить арест на активы преступной организации, которой руководил Янукович, на сумму более $2,5 миллиардов США. Конфисковали мы в бюджет Украины активов на сумму более $1,5 миллиарда США.
Probably one of the most important investigations in that case actually happened in the U.S. Senate, and I think it's good that actually that investigation led by Senator Johnson was finished. I would say that obviously at some point, especially Ukrainian law enforcement agencies should basically put their word to that case, and that topic will remain sensitive if that case is kind of remained unsolved.
Just a couple of months ago, US intelligence agencies specifically named Andriy Derkach as working for Russia during attempts to interfere in the 2016 US election campaign. Last year, he was added to the sanctions list. Amid the allegations, it's easy to forget he's still a member of the Ukrainian parliament, representing the Sumy region in the northeast of the country. And Derkach defiantly says he won't stop his work.
What do you think makes this story still so relevant?
Прокурор Рябошапка, которого назначили после выборов президента Зеленского, который фигурирует в разговоре между Зеленским и Трампом, как стопроцентный человек якобы президента Зеленского, сказал, что дела по Буризму нет. На самом деле 11 дел, касающихся Злочевского, как бывшего министра Януковича, который, используя свое служебное положение, выдавал лицензии на свои компании. И была прослежена практически история, связанная с происхождением средств. Что здесь важно? Что те деньги, которые выводились с Украины, проходили, вот если вы обратите внимание, через вот эти 2 компании. Biologic Technologies и Digitex. И мы представили в октябре месяце свидетелей, которые непосредственно проводили эти деньги, отмытый кэш, выведенный из Украины, отмытый через эти 2 компании, с участием этих 2 свидетелей на их компьютере. Дальше шел на Бурисму, на Байденов и на ваших соотечественников из КРО. Эти платежи у нас есть. Мы видим все проводки. Более того, в распоряжении правоохранительных органов Украины даже есть компьютер, с которого происходили эти платежи. Эти дела мы не дали закрыть. Несколько раз была история попытки закрыть эти дела. Но самое интересное, еще есть история. Это в прошлом году была задержана самая большая, вернее, в июне месяце была самая большая в Европе взятка в кэш. За дело Злачевского, которого, по мнению Рябошапки, не существует. Если нет дела, за что принесли 5 миллионов долларов, люди были задержаны НАБУ, есть видео. Вся страна смотрела, потому что вживую никогда 5 миллионов долларов в виде взятки вообще никто не видел. Поэтому дело это продолжается, и по взятке в том числе.
The central issues, though, the one that keeps emerging, are the allegations of election interference, corruption in both Ukraine and the United States, and inevitably, the Hunter Biden story will rumble on.
So I think what you have to do is separate the fact from the fiction. Yes, there was corruption. Yes, it needs investigating. No, it has nothing to do with George Soros at all. And the other narratives which they're using their evidence to support, along with, around Ukraine intervening in the election rather than Russia, are also extremely problematic.
Це буде, мабуть, один з таких найбільших, з найбільш частого використання, саме як у вигляді такого компромату, про який всі знають, хтось чув, але не знає, в чому його суть. І другий момент саме для виборчих кампаніях, для дискредитації політиків, так, однозначно.
For the former criminal prosecutor Konstantin Kulik, it's not about election interference or politics at all.
Что бы сказал скептикам? Дело в том, что я не занимался сбором доказательств в отношении нарушений, допущенных демократами на выборах. Я занимался расследованием похищенных в Украине денег и попыткой их конфисковать, вернуть назад.
Stolen money not recovered, no meaningful prosecutions for the killings of protesters on Maidan 7 years ago. Ukraine's judicial system still has many questions to answer. More unsavory headlines could be coming too if former Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin publishes the memoirs he recently finished writing and which we managed to get a copy of. The only thing for sure is the US won't be shaking off the Ukraine story anytime soon.
Yeah, we hope you enjoyed that documentary. Everyone, we have, I'll start with a couple of questions we've had from outside. So from Martin Banks from EU Reporter, he asked, what role did the son of US President Hunter Biden and the former Polish President Alexander Kwasniewski play in Burisma? Who brought them together with Mykola Zlochevsky, the former Ukrainian government minister suspected of corruption?
Okay, thank you for the question. I hope you can hear me. It's very difficult for me to say exactly that. I suspect, as it transpired during the documentary, that Kwasniewski and particularly Hunter Biden were both recruited purely for their name to try to put a veneer, shall we say, of respectability about Burisma, which was certainly lacking with investigations underway in Ukraine and with questions about money already and Zlochevsky being under the microscope. I guess he was hoping to buy pressure and buy influence, which is pretty common even in the West, but even more so in Eastern Europe. So I think it was purely the names. I suspect that in actual fact, they did very, very little work at all. They may have just performed perfunctory roles in turning up for maybe online board meetings, or maybe not even that. It's not even documented. So although there was a title as we heard from a few of our guests during the documentary, I think it was purely all about famous names being able potentially to exert pressure and put a veneer of respectability.
Okay, and a second question from Martin Banks. Considering the investigation, do you think that the Burisma case could have been one of the reasons why former president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko's electoral rating dropped so significantly that 2 years ago, 73% of Ukrainians made their choice in favor of Volodymyr Zelensky?
I don't think the two are linked, really. I think there was just a desperate crying out for change from the Ukrainian people, and a succession of politicians and a succession of oligarchs hadn't really brought tangible change. From my friends and from my experiences in the country, a country I love deeply, most people were just completely fed up. And I think the one thing I would say in Poroshenko's defense, or a couple of things: one, he had a war to fight, and so it was very difficult to defend the country and to make progress with very little money. And secondly, I think people expected change too quickly after Maidan. There was a feeling that people had twice given a real opportunity for Ukraine to look west. A lot of people are disappointed there wasn't more support tangibly from the EU and from the US, but whenever there is more support, you get allegations from the other side of trying to buy influences. Again, refers back to the documentary. So there were certainly some allegations of corruption around Poroshenko at that time, but I don't think that substantially swung the feeling of the people. It was just an overriding plea for change, and they thought I believe that a lot of them thought, well, let's give this guy a chance, electing someone who hasn't been in politics, completely fresh face on TV, has played the role of the president and played it quite amusingly in his TV show, particularly the first series, I thought, was a chance for change. I think the jury's still out. I think he's made a lot of mistakes, and even corruption allegations have been made against Zelensky, and people wanting to know why money sectioned off for COVID-19 was spent on roads and things like that. So there are ongoing allegations all the time. It doesn't mean they're all, of course, provable or even based on fact, but people are always slinging mud around. But to answer the point, just to summarize again the question from Martin, did you say it was? I don't think it had a dramatic effect on Poroshenko's really bad poll rating in the runoff against Zelensky in the previous presidential election.
Okay, and a third question, for another question I have here: the documents and witness statements that you refer to in your film make it clear that Joe Biden, as the Vice President of the United States, had a great influence on Ukraine and used telephone law to ensure the adoption of decisions he wanted, in particular regarding the dismissal of the former Prosecutor General of Ukraine, Viktor Shokin, who is in charge of the Burisma case. Is there any evidence that the new Ukrainian government can resume the Burisma case? Does the Joe Biden administration continue to have significant influence over the Ukrainian government?
Okay, thanks, Julian. Thanks for the question. There's, as we heard, Mr. Derkach and the colleagues, particularly on the opposition platform for Life, will be always pressing for investigations to be reopened. They're kind of halted at the moment, and as we heard towards the end of the documentary from someone in a think tank and advisory panel, that until Ukraine has made a thorough investigation and completely closed this topic, it's bound to continue to rear its ugly head again, to use a phrase I've already used during this press conference. So I think it's in Ukraine's interest to finally, truthfully, honestly, maybe even using outside sources, even if they come to the same conclusions that the US Senate committee did, to try to once and for all put this to bed. We had already seen Zelensky try to bring allegations of corruption and against Poroshenko, and those have in the end gone nowhere. They're obviously defended by the previous president. Whether there's still going to be influence from Biden, I think it's fair to say that US just by its sheer size, influences a lot of countries. And I think Russia does, and I think China does. I don't think it's any different. It's politics, it's to do with wealth, it's to do with support, strategic support. And so I don't see what the US is doing in supporting or influencing is much different to what's going on anywhere else in the world. Small nations striving to keep their independence do inevitably have to have allies. Some would say allies become lapdogs. Others would say it's necessary for the larger states to support the poorer states, the less able states to stand on their own 2 feet, whether it be in terms of arms at times of war, or whether it be in terms of supporting vaccination prospects and projects rather, because Ukraine is one of the worst countries in Europe for vaccinations. So I think there's a lot more that could be done. And I don't think everything should be seen as trying to influence decision-making. But again, as I proved in the documentary, and as has been widely spoken about before, there was certainly some influence used by Biden. And some of it does look like undue influence to me.
Okay, thank you. And a fourth question I have here. During the presidency of Petro Poroshenko, the standard of living in Ukraine dropped significantly, in particular at the beginning of his term in 2014. The exchange rate of the hryvnia to the dollar was about 11.5 hryvnia to the dollar, while at the end of his tenure at the head of the Ukrainian state, the exchange rate had risen to 27 hryvnia per dollar. In addition, Poroshenko's government had consistently followed instructions from the IMF and the United States to raise tariffs, raise the retirement age, among others. Don't you think that one of the reasons for the decline in living standards in Ukraine may be due to the withdrawal of funds from this country, which took place through Burisma as well?
Obviously, from a seasoned Ukraine watcher, probably someone within the country or with close links to the country, very well informed. Long question, where do I start? Yes, the hryvnia was devalued at the time, in my opinion, from around 11.5, 12, I think, when Poroshenko came in. It very quickly started to slide in strength. There were a number of reasons for that. One, it had been artificially supported by Yanukovych, as has been pretty well known. It was pegged at 8, which was unrealistic. And when the real free market principles started to come into being post-Maidan Revolution 2014, everyone knew that the hryvnia was going to become significantly weaker. Also, there was at that time very large inflation, which obviously cuts into the value of a nation's currency. I think it touched 48% at one time over a whole year in Poroshenko's regime. So that instantly takes away 50% of the value of a currency against somewhere with zero or very low inflation like the United States and like the dollar. So it's not all Poroshenko's fault. The other thing, of course, was an increasingly large amount of the budget had to be spent on defending the territory. Russia had invaded Crimea. Russia is still in Crimea, illegally annexed, as you know. Russia is still, if not directly, inside Ukrainian territory, passing out passports illegally to people in Donbass and Luhansk, and is still supporting the so-called administrations there that is not recognized by any country in the world outside of a few of Russia's allies. And the Ukrainian army at the time, the Ukrainian defenses were in a really pretty shocking state, and a lot of money had to be spent. It was for all the negative things that have been written about them, it was the self-defense battalions that started things going originally. Eventually, they were brought into the Ukrainian sphere and control was taken of them. But it did take a lot of investment, and a lot of things have been left to go to rack and ruin under Yanukovych. So a lot of money was also lost from the mines and other heavy industries in the Donbass. So there are a lot of factors, meaning that the hryvnia was bound to get weaker, and indeed did get significantly weaker. I think whether or not Poroshenko was guilty of taking money out of the country, and Yanukovych, obviously pretty easily to prove, had done so before, probably didn't have a great effect on the balances of the nation. You're talking about absolutely vast sums here. Nothing has been proven against Petro Poroshenko. The allegations still persist, but even if they can be proven, or if they are proven at some future point, I think it's a drop in the ocean and wouldn't have made a significant difference to the value of the currency.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tim. So has anyone else out there? I don't see any other questions at the moment, but you know, type in a question if you've got one on the chat. I'll give you a moment or two to think. And if there aren't any further questions, I'd just like to, perhaps I'd ask one of my own or a couple of my own. Tim, what's your overall take, or if you like, takeaway from this documentary, and what's important to follow up here, and what's going to happen with your documentary?
Okay, thanks, Julian. Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone who participated in it for sure, gave their time willingly for free. It was a difficult project, and thanks to my family and friends for putting up with me as well. What's going to happen with it? We hope that someone will come in and recoup some of the expenses with a bid to show it. Usually one side or the other on Ukrainian TV is eager to show anything from foreign journalists and independent investigations. The questions, well, many still remain to be answered, and that's the problem. It needs to be categorically put to bed, doesn't it? We need to find out whether there was any corruption. Even the most ardent pro-Ukrainians featured in our documentary, Steve Komenitsky in particular, I think summed it up very well, saying that there almost certainly was some corruption. I think that needs to be proven. Ukraine has to try to eradicate corruption. It's not an overnight thing. It takes many, many, many years. Georgia did pretty well in the post-Soviet era to try to get rid of corruption. But as we found, and allegations even regarding the Conservative Party in my own country, in the UK, and another former Russian today surfacing in the news. So it's very difficult to keep on top of corruption in any country in the world, but certainly in Ukraine, it has been much worse than in most countries in Europe, and continues to be so. I believe, I hope that they're heading on the right path, but we can't expect miracles overnight. I really do hope there's a completely independent investigation here that can get to the bottom of everything, even if it means admitting to and inflicting some wounds on their own administration. I think it's what needs to be done to put everything to bed and give Ukraine another fresh start 7 years after Maidan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Tim. Here we go. We do have something else, actually. So somebody here says it'd be interesting to know a bit more on the author of the film and history of his personal approach to the topic.
Okay, sure. Thank you for your question. I don't think there's a name on that one. My childhood really sparked my fascination with Eastern Europe, Soviet Union, as it was in the time, partially by football. I remember seeing all these exotic names and listening around the transistor, as my parents used to call it, on a Wednesday night, listening to Radio 2 and European football, and hearing Liverpool play these teams, and becoming really quite influenced, I guess, as a small child by Dynamo Kiev, and thinking after hearing my mother and my father speak, and just the general wariness and how people were scared of the Soviet Union and thought that if you went there, you might never come home. And I was thinking, even at a very young age, I remember distinctly thinking, well, if we're thinking that about them, I bet they're thinking that about us, aren't they? And I'd really like to go and find out for myself. Well, it was many, many years later when I got my first chance to go to Ukraine. And then the first revolution happened. We're talking about immediately post-Soviet times. Ukraine existed more or less as a satellite of Russia and still involved in the CIS. But gradually over the years, following my early visits and working there, I've seen the real thirst for independence, and the way that the Ukrainian and Russian paths have diverged, and it is, I think, involved in the characters. I think there are different characters. They're not completely one brotherhood. There's some similarities and there are some distinct differences, and Ukraine is moving further away from Russia, or probably we should say that Russia's were moving further away from the world, and maybe some would say even normal civilization. And while they're retracing not very nice historic steps, in my opinion, into the dark ages of a totalitarian regime and fear, Ukraine is trying to embrace the more modern aspects, and I would say better aspects, and hopefully more peaceful aspects of world society. And happy to talk about Ukraine all day long, much to my family's immense frustration. So I've grown in love with the country. I've been there many times. I've made other documentaries. My first one in Ukraine was to do with fake news and fighting fake news at a time when the term was not really freely used in the media. I've taught at a very historic, probably the #1 university in Kiev, and still have many friends at the Molyanska Academy, world renowned and back to its former glory, and allied with the Kiev Business School as well, a marvelous institution. And I'll continue to go, I'll continue to meet friends, and I'll continue to try to, in a small way, shed some light on Ukraine from an international point of view, because it too often slips out of the headlines and only comes back in when it involves the US like this. There's still a lot of work to be done inside Ukraine. And hopefully, as I said, it's on a slow but sure path towards a better future.
Okay, very, very interesting. And can I just ask one other question? Do you then, how did you learn? Presumably you speak, I don't know if it's Ukrainian, but do you speak Ukrainian, and how did you learn that?
Well, it was it's difficult. Ukrainian, not so much. And I think this is another myth, actually, because I was going there in times of very early independence of Ukrainian. People still spoke predominantly Russian, even in Kiev. There's this myth in Russia that nobody in Ukraine speaks Russian or is allowed to speak Russian. It is a myth. I still frequently use Russian. Everyone can understand me if they can't understand English. And I'm trying to improve my few words of Ukrainian just out of respect for the country. Interestingly, a lot was made of the language law, and a lot of political, shall we say, point scoring was allowed to be made when there was a new law passed immediately after the revolution and the new government came to pass that tried to make Ukrainian certainly the #1 language, and reduce the status of Russian to that of another language, but still able to be used freely in other parts of the country, of course, wherever it was still very popular and the most popular. But it is a difficult language to learn because same as with any East Asian language, you're using a completely different alphabet, but there are certainly some similarities. There are some helping points along the way. I speak a little bit of Russian, probably just about enough to get by, and I can understand quite a few words of Ukrainian, but stringing them together in coherent sentences is a little bit more difficult, but at least I can read. And I tell you what, going out with friends in Ukraine, and when they're all speaking in either Ukrainian or Russian, you soon have to improve, especially when they all start laughing and you haven't a clue and feel very paranoid. So that kind of helped. And working with guys out there, of course, helps, and reading and listening to documentaries, listening to chats, and reading the news journals and websites improves quite markedly. But what I do find, as I guess as well, you're a real polyglot, Julian, aren't you, that when you're first learning, as soon as you move away from that country and you're back in your native territory, for me in the United Kingdom, within a couple of weeks, you really start to regress, and then you go back, as when I go back to Ukraine, and the first couple of days are a bit of a nightmare, and then after day 3, 4 or 5, I'm back up to pretty much the standard I was before. So it's like climbing the Eiger or Everest in the eye of a storm. It's like 2 little steps forward, and then you're blown back a little bit, and then you try to get back to where you were. But I've never taken a lesson of Ukrainian in my life, not taken Russian. I had a couple of friends, particularly when I was teaching at a university in England, in Leeds, Mike Rawnsley, who was translator and an Eastern Europeanophile, if we can call it that. And he helped teach me the alphabet, first of all, and gave me some stock phrases to use on my early visits. So I'm eternally indebted to Mike as well. So thanks for him.
Wow, very impressive. No lessons, but it's very impressive because it's tough learning any language. So all credit to you, and all credit to you for the documentary, for shedding light on a very complicated set of issues, very, very complicated. Wish you success with it. I think, unless I don't see any other questions, we'll probably draw this to a close. But maybe, Tim, if you'd like to say a final word or add anything else, then over to you.
Yeah, thanks again to everyone at the Press Club. Thanks to everyone who's borne with me, who's watched the documentary. I think we had nearly 3,000 viewers at one point on YouTube during the live streaming of the documentary. We'll see who else wants to show the documentary. If anyone is interested, they can contact me either via the Press Club or directly. My Twitter handle is @TWMC Limited. That's the initials for Tim White Media Consultancy Limited. So @TWMC Limited. I've just been told in the chat here we had nearly 10,500 views on Press Club TV on YouTube. So that's fantastic. Thank you to everyone who supported me. Thanks again to every contributor. And thanks to Laurent and the team, to Leo, and also to yourself, Julian, for being such an excellent moderator about a subject that you came into very late and completely cold. And bravo, as Ukrainians and Russians would say, Team Молодец, you've done really well with the pronunciations today. For a first time, I thought that was exceptional. I hope everyone's enjoyed the broadcast, and thank you very much to anyone who's given me their time to help make this project.
Okay, thanks very much, Tim. Thanks everyone for your contributions. Thanks for that little bit of Russian, which Ukrainian, which I have now got some more interest in Ukraine thanks to you. So that's great. Gives me some points of reference. So thanks a lot. And let's draw this to a close then. I think. Thanks very much, everyone. And okay. Goodbye.